Good morning, everyone. How's everybody enjoying the conference so far? You are in the Designing Wheelchair Provision for People with MS, new qualitative research presented by Dr. Faith Brown this morning. And we will be live streaming this session, so we're going to hold questions to the end, so the individuals are able to hear the questions if anybody in the audience has them. And we will be around to give you a microphone so they're able to hear. And I will give those of you who need CEUs for attending this session, I will provide the CEU code at the end of the session. And without further ado, Dr. Faith Brown.
Okay, thank you. And that's very kind. Thanks, Libby. I will just clarify, my supervisor is the doctor. I have a master's, which that was good enough. I was glad to get that. So that's where we are. But thank you so much. So happy to see all. Oh, I have to do this. Okay, there we go. You have to keep me honest. I have to be by the microphone for the live stream. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I know second day. I don't see too many grey faces, so I guess people went out too late last night. So this is presenting some research I did for the masters. We had obviously COVID recently, and since there was a global killer viral pandemic, I thought, why don't I study epidemiology? So I am an occupational therapist by background, but I went out and got a master's in health research methods for public health. And so this is the work that was on the back of that. Co-author, she's not here today, but she's here in spirit. That is Dr. Christel McMullan. She was my supervisor on the project. So without further ado, I have a little, oops, oh, we're not going. You press the space bar, and why would things just go straightforwardly? There we go, it's all happening now. Okay, let's back up though. Conflict of interest statement. I don't have any to disclose on this one, so there we are. So that's the statement done there. Objectives, you would have probably seen that in your pack, but just to review that. So what we're really talking about here is a study that was done specifically for the needs of people with MS, which is obviously short for multiple sclerosis. And I've used a particular theoretical approach. We're getting a little bit philosophical, but it's not bad at all. But I do want to speak to a little bit of why I chose that one and what it's about. And also two potential implications for practice. One of the great things about being in America is I think American providers are very good at always asking, so what? So that's definitely our so what section that we'll be having. Okay, so crashing on here. So MS is quite prevalent. It has, well, when I started the work, 2.2 million worldwide, but there'll be more than that now. And particularly in the UK, it's quite prevalent. There's about 7,000 new cases annually. And in fact, one of the National Health Wheelchair Services identified MS as its second most common diagnosis. So very common. And the way people get wheelchairs in the United Kingdom, as you might imagine, is a little bit different to the way it's done here, but I think there are some harmonies we can look at. So the way we work is there's basically three streams. There's national health, also called the NHS. There's private purchase. Anybody could rock up to a supplier, which we tend to call dealers, but I will try not to do that because I think people don't like that here, but nobody cares in the UK. So, but our valued and knowledgeable suppliers, people can buy from there. And then there's some overlap. So obviously, you know, just because you have one, there's nothing to stop you from having another. And I think that's probably the same in both countries, that people sometimes will buy a specialty chair for sports or outdoors or things like that. The reason, well, in doing this study, obviously I did a literature review to see what's out there. And like all of you, I've been coming to these sorts of conferences for a long time. year on year. In my case, it might shock you to know I'm over 28. So I've been coming for quite a few years, in fact, 2 decades. And every year there's research and people present things and people talk about multiple sclerosis. So I was quite surprised to see there wasn't much specifically to do with the needs of people with multiple sclerosis in the wheelchair provision process. So anyways, there was, however, some research that was, I think, spoke to the topic. There was quite a bit about the needs of people with MS as far as adjusting to the diagnosis, and also about sort of assistive technology more broadly. The other thing I wanted to say, part of the reason I thought MS was important to look at is it's a diagnosis, obviously, that isn't, it can kind of fall through the cracks, at least in our system, in that nothing happens sometimes for a long time and people are managing, and then things can happen all at once and then nothing again. Whereas sometimes when people have a big injury, brain injury, obviously there's neurological units, or a spinal cord injury, and then there's a lot of input all at once. So that was a reason I thought was worth particularly being specific to this group. The other thing is because it tends to happen in adulthood, somewhere between young and middle adulthood, people have already established all their routines without the condition. So there we have it. And it also had some political tie-ins. Our government has made wheelchairs part of the National Disability Strategy. So there we go. So despite the paucity of research in this area, industrially produced wheelchairs in the United Kingdom are not new. Carter's, actually it's quite a cool design, this one. That looks like it could really go some places. This is from 1910. So over 100 years ago, there were mass manufactured wheelchairs, not just something the local blacksmith knocked up. So they're not that new. I don't know if you can read the type there, but at the time they were called self-propelling and bath chairs and spinal carriages. So they've been around a long time. So I thought it was about time we looked at this group. And as I said, there was actually nothing specifically on it. So then that led to the research question, which was really, well, what, from the user experience, the actual people who go through the process, what do they identify as parts of the provision process, from assessment, fitting, maybe review, that were useful and what weren't useful. And I did it as a qualitative study. And the reason is, it's important that we know to ask the right questions. So I like quantitative studies. I like a good statistic, nothing wrong with that. But in quantitative research, your whole goal is to get rid of bias, isn't it? You want a big sample size, try to control for bias any kind of way you can. Whereas, and in that, you have to be very specific. What are the questions we're asking at the beginning? You know, A, B, C, tick the box, get some statistics. But sometimes it's useful to step back early stages and even figure out what are the questions to ask. I think a really great example of this, if we leave assistive technology for a moment, if anybody's read Daniel Kahneman's modern classic, Thinking Fast and Slow? Anybody? Yeah, I see some nods there. Yeah, great. Okay. So there was an example in World War II. I think his name was Abraham Wald, was a mathematician who was involved in a team looking at where to put armor on planes. So planes would go out to the front, some sadly would be downed and some would come back with holes all over them. And it was important not to put too much armor on the planes because it made them quite heavy. And it was expensive and it burned up fuel, and fuel was a limited resource. At the same time, they do need armor so that the bullets didn't go through the plane. So they did they started with this real quantitative, where are the bullets? Let's count the bullets, let's make some statistics. And Abraham Wald came along and said, we shouldn't be counting the bullet holes on the planes that came back. We need to figure out the right question to ask is, where are the bullet holes on the ones that didn't make it back? So in this case, I'm trying to figure out what is that right question to even start asking. So that's why I thought qualitative might be a good way to go. And it allows us to go very deep with a very small group, and we just acknowledge it's going to be biased, it's going to be complex. It's biased because I'm asking the questions and I bring my own perspectives to it. And there are ways of, I have to document my thinking process through that. So that's the qualitative bit. Sorry, just this computer, for some reason, it's not advancing the slides here. So I'll just move that so I don't have to keep looking at the screen. Great. And the approach I used is one called critical realism. There's a real technology thing here. Hello. Whoop. You know what I'm going to do is we're just going to close it and start over. Whoop. Where is the file live, Mr. Caleb, on your lovely computer? I don't know. It was a Windows thing. I did some real Mac shortcut and have ruined it. It knows I hate it and is taking its ire out on me now. Okay, we're off and running. Is it doing things? Okay, we're winning. Good. Okay, lovely. La 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 la. Okay, critical realism. So anybody heard of critical realism? Hey, well done. Nice one. Okay, good. So it's been around in disability-related research for a while, but it's kind of a very philosophical thing. But when you do qualitative research, you're actually kind of saying we need to actually think about what we really can know. What is the nature of what's knowable and how do we get there? And it gets all quite dense after a while. But the fact is, when people speak, we all know sometimes people say what they mean and mean what they say, and a lot of times they don't. So how are we approaching this? And critical realism is just a useful working framework. You have to set up some assumptions at the beginning, and it sets up the assumption that, okay, talking to somebody, it's going to be their version of things. It's going to be their reality. We all create our version of the world. Any political debate will show that quickly. But however, getting the viewpoints of several people can give you a sense of an underlying external truth. So there is that value in it, which you kind of need to assume that if we're looking at potential implications for practice and further research anyway. As far as the method, you have to go, when doing this sort of study, I had to go through a process of analyzing the data, and I used one called reflexive thematic analysis, which in a nutshell is where you go through several phases of looking at this giant amount of verbal data and coming to themes through several recursive reflective phases. And so some of the ways I did that was using, there is some software, but it's really glorified Post-it notes is what this software is. It's not like nice statistical software. You put in data and you get a graph at the end. It's just so you don't lose what you've been thinking, because you have to go through the data and code, what does that mean? And then go through it again and compare the codes and eventually come up with some themes at the end. So I did use some online software to keep hold of that, and you can see these are the two phases. One was at the first coding phase, and then those changed quite a bit. And you can see here, this is like, it's alphabetical, and it's only down to C back there at the back. So there were pages and pages of even the codes to start. But there were colored pencils harmed in the making of this study. Sometimes I did just get out a big piece of paper because I was trying to figure out what am I even thinking here. Okay, so the study did have to go through ethics approval. By the way, this is, as you might have guessed, the University of Birmingham in England. Our friends in America have a nice one in Alabama, apparently, University of Alabama at Birmingham. I hope to go there one day. Maybe I can get a t-shirt and wear it at this one, very proudly. So anyways, yes, so it's the Institute of Applied Health approved the ethics of the study. Recruitment was fun and games because it was in the time of COVID. Everybody had to be quite flexible in that time. Certainly, all of you, thank you for your service in serving people that need this equipment. And higher education was anybody. Is anybody in higher education in here? Okay, not today, but you know, well done to those people who did, because all the professors and academic staff had to hustle and go to online in no time. And also with recruiting for studies, out of nowhere, after we started the study, came down an edict in the National Health Service that you were not allowed to recruit for anything other than COVID studies. Okay, good. So we did what everybody does, and we resorted to, social media. Microsoft has it out for me. Yes, so I had very kind partners with some advocacy groups, agreed to send out study invitations, and MS UK was a UK Facebook group that was helpful, plus some local branches of another MS group, and also a video, because obviously it's nice to get to know the person you might be doing a study with. So that was really helpful. We also use snowballing, which is an accepted thing in qualitative research, because we're looking at in depth how one group experiences things. So for people that participated, I asked them to please ask their friends, and that did result in one participant. And then as far as data collection tools that we used, so two of them actually, Vignette. I like a vignette. And a vignette is, of course, just a fancy word for a story. So what we did, there was a 1 hour interview with each participant and this little vignette about Sam. And if you, all the slides are obviously available on the app, etc., and the handouts. So if you read through it, it's about Sam and him getting a wheelchair. In this case, I actually had him getting one privately. And the reason is he had to put his own money into it, and that allowed people to respond. Money is kind of a proxy for value, isn't it? So he actually hires a private OT. So, and that did elicit some very interesting responses. Also using a vignette, there's quite a bit of research about qualitative research suggests, particularly in psychology, that vignettes can be useful for people to express themselves quite freely because they're talking about Sam and not talking about Faith. So obviously, it's still their opinions about what works for a person with MS. It also gives one bit of standardization. Even though it's about an individual's experience, it means that they're all responding to one particular scenario. And in this scenario, he's a manual wheelchair user who's transitioning to power who has MS. Okay, great. So participants in the end, good group, 8, which is good for this kind of qualitative study because you're going in depth rather than wide. It's not a quantitative study. And it just happened to be the male-female ratio is representative of population. Great. Invited all the countries of the UK, or as the United States calls them, states, to come. So it was England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland were all invited, but it's just the people that happened to respond were Northern Ireland and England, and very typical ages for people that have MS, adults in their productive years. Okay. Well done. So that's all the methodology stuff. We've got through it, but I wanted to include that in case people do want to have questions, and also for the sake of due diligence here. So what it all boils down to. So in reflexive thematic analysis, you're looking for themes that all kind of revolve around a central core sort of trunk of a theme. And really, maybe no particular surprise, but I think the nuances are the more interesting bit. All these themes had to do with a concept of supported autonomy, and both of those words are absolutely critical. The client, as we tend to, is the term we tend to use. I think rider is the popular term here, both great terms, needs to be autonomous. We're talking about adults making decisions about their life, but it's also no good if that autonomy comes without support. That also is expressed as a real problem. Autonomy is no good without support, support's no good without autonomy. Really, both parts of that have to be in place. And these were the themes that came up for me in the interpretation. And one was accessible information, and that's another two-parter. People wanted information, no surprise. Everybody goes to Dr. Google first, so no shocker there. But what they really wanted were formats that they could use and get to, and that it was good quality, explicit expertise. So knowing what you're doing, and you have to tell me what you're doing, actually was super important. And tailoring choice, which was one of the ones I found the most interesting. Again, not just more choice, but very individualized. And also the emotional energy of the whole process was a real issue every single person brought up. Okay, so just to dive into this a bit with clear, accessible information. So some of the issues were that people did find information, and they found it quite useful, but it didn't always agree. The different sources didn't agree with each other, even within the UK. So, and we have, sometimes you hear the term postcode lottery. It's not a very nice term, but the idea that if you live some places, you get one thing, and another place you get something else. And it's always something we're trying to eliminate, but it does exist. And it could be a bit contradictory or insufficient. And also the formats, really. Nobody's got time. We're all busy. People with multiple sclerosis, of course, are also busy, and also have to be dealing with a diagnosis that can cause fatigue, can cause visual problems. So a wall of text may not be particularly useful. So is there a video out there was particularly wanted, and then it's consistent. And getting information from other disabled people was valuable, even if they were people who were radically different from the participants. So one of the things as a researcher you have to do is a lot of sitting on your hands and not, giving my OT to P, as we say, my opinion on what I think is or isn't a thing. And so, yeah, some of my that was interesting to me. That it wasn't necessarily very similar, but that was considered a very useful source of information. So I just got a few quotes here to illustrate this. So this was one. Sorry, we're all above 18, yes, adults here. So this is a direct quote. If you're new to the wheelchair world, it's an absolute bloody nightmare. And I'm not the only person in this world that does it, suddenly needs a wheelchair. And what I found was useless, next to useless. So I thought that was pretty clear. Didn't work so well. There's not a lot of interpretation on that one. So I've just highlighted some of the keywords. Obviously, if you download this, you can read all of it. But that sense that I could get a better wheelchair, is this it? Is there something out there? So kind of seeking out that information and trying to find reliable sources. And this was particularly interesting too, this finding clear, accessible information. Some of the studies I looked at in the literature review found wildly different approaches. One in 2017 by Strickland and Worthy and Kennedy was looking at how people adjust to an MS diagnosis. And they looked at it as a kind of a rite of passage and a new identity, and information seeking was part of it. Yet in 2011, there was a different study also to do with people with new diagnoses that found in their group, a lot of people avoided the world of MS, and wheelchairs were considered a very scary thing, a very obvious cultural symbol of disability. So so this is something that both groups, they wanted the information to be there, it's accessible, but not before I'm ready for it, really. Okay, so then that brings us to the next theme, explicit expertise. And that was a really interesting one for me. And I think probably for many of you as providers, obviously we look at the client as the driver of this thing. They're the center of attention. And sometimes in being humble, we can be a little bit unclear about saying, why are we there? What are we exactly doing? And so they really found it useful when somebody said, for example, I'm an occupational therapist and I'm here to help with the design and the ergonomics of the system, or just put it in kind of everyday terms like that. And obviously, if somebody had prior experiences with somebody, then they kind of just assumed the next, whoever with that title, the next OT, the whatever, didn't have very much experience. So that's just something we have to deal with as providers. And this Sam, of course, in Vignette, the response here was looking for somebody who's knowledgeable, approachable, and patient, as in has patience. And I liked this other one too. This is from the same guy that gave that other quote about the information being bloody useless. He said it's like buying a car when you're 17. So, and he really was a knowledgeable guy. He had a private wheelchair, went out and just bought it, but he really needed the supplier, and he had a good one. He had a good experience with the supplier, but he really valued that the supplier did know what he was talking about. Okay, tailored choice. So this one, again, like I say, was one of the most interesting ones for me. So choice is important, but not too much choice was actually not wanted and found to be very stressful if that tailoring bit wasn't in there. They're already stressed. Some of these individuals were already stressed out enough. They don't have so much energy in the day, and they really needed the whole thing to be individualized. And I thought actually it was very interesting. Who went to the opening session yesterday? Yeah, good. Okay, almost everybody good. So this actually kind of, to me, underlined what Chaz was talking about with people are individuals. This is a group of people with MS, but each person is completely an individual with all the bits of the iceberg underneath, their experiences, etc. So this guy, this was interesting. He actually got the wheelchair that wasn't quite what he would have liked, but he appreciated that the provider bothered to find out what would be the most useful for him and respond to tailoring the options to him, and gave him that choice because he can handle it, even though he chose no push handles. Then he realized he's kind of middle-aged and kind of wish he had them sometimes on the big hills, but he still appreciated that as part of the process that he went through. And the second one, that for his first wheelchair, he liked that when the supplier came to his house and they tried out the chair in the back garden so nobody could see it from the street, because he didn't want to be seen in a wheelchair. That was something he was very worried about at that time. So going along with tailored choice, part of tailoring a choice is understanding that there may be some tensions for you to navigate. Wheelchairs are a funny bit of assistive technology in that they kind of sit somewhere between a car and an orthosis in a way, and that there's this whole spectrum. And people might be approaching it from either end, particularly as their needs change and they have more prescriptive equipment. These were both for the vignette. So speaking very freely about Sam, they were both manual wheelchair users who had scooters. And I'll point you to the next one. That was the first response I got from the vignette, which was, she would like an OT not to be there, thanks. And I thought, this study's going well. Right. But what she needed was, if you were an OT, to read the room there and be very deferential in that case, and just try to show some value through, show not tell, because that would have backfired big time on her. And in fact, when she talked about what a hired power chair she had, I did have some opinions about actually the setup could have made her not load the front casters, but again, that was a sitting on hands moment. And last but absolutely not least, because it really ran through all of it, was about minimizing emotional energy. And I think that's something probably every single person with a long conference here can understand. Emotional and physical energy are tied together. Actually, this is a concept that came in the 1980s, the term emotional energy from actually airline stewardesses. Is anybody familiar with that one? To do with occupational health, not occupational therapy. But anyways, and just the labor, the emotional labor of being nice to people all day and how really exhausting that was. So in the same way, often physical fatigue was tied to the effort of chasing and admin and when's my wheelchair getting here? And I remember, as humans, we only remember so much of what's told to us. And when we're stressed, guess what? We don't think clearly. And when we're tired, we don't think clearly. And often clients getting wheelchairs who have MS might be both. So they really wanted that to be minimized. So some quotes about that, just having to keep phone them. And this one, so I thought that was very interesting. This last guy, 3 people in the room. So what he was talking about here was, all of these people very kindly were participants in the study. They're happy to participate in research. That is not a problem. They took time out of their lives in a pandemic to sit with me on Zoom for an hour, plus do this vignette. But he had taken time out of his day job, probably had to take some, possibly even annual leave, hopefully not, you're not supposed to, but you never know how employers go. Went to the wheelchair appointments, waited for weeks. He's spent the morning there. He's parked, he's done all the thing, it's been hours really out of his day. He's about to leave, and then somebody comes up and says, oh, here's an outcome questionnaire. And he was like, we're done here. I don't have it for this. So that was not a low energy way of doing that. So when we're looking at outcome measures, which I love an outcome measure, believe in an outcome measure, but we need to think about how are we presenting those in a way that does integrate really into the lives of the people that are receiving our services. And again, this person actually highlighted, I think, a way that the interactions reduced the emotional energy. And that was with, some of these good old things we know about, being caring and knowledgeable and taking the time to consider the emotional and mental toll of the whole experience, really. So that was that one. Looking at kind of bringing this together. So for this group that sometimes maybe don't have a wheelchair for a long time, are not people who necessarily signed up to be in the assistive technology world, probably like actually many of our clients, really probably most of them, but it's kind of come on them when they thought, oh, I've gotten to adulthood, even middle age, and I'm pretty healthy, and then all of a sudden they're here. Looking at that provision process, the things they really wanted were individualized, tailored expertise, where you tell them what you're doing, but you need to be careful how much you need to tell them, but in a way that very much respects them. So it is that balance. Accessible information that they can get to. Both the content needs to agree with other providers. Also, we talked about the formats, but also often and early, which is a very old school marketing concept. Is anybody in marketing in here? No, nobody will admit it. Self Godin likes to say we're all in marketing. But anyways, yes, but the fact is there was individuals that were involved, for example, in MS centers, really good NHS centers designed to coordinate care. And early in their journey, they didn't need a wheelchair, they didn't need their wheelchair, and it was never mentioned until very, very late. Maybe it was mentioned early on and then forgotten about. So while they're going there for a follow-up, are there centers that as providers we could link in with and have a way for people to get information often and early? What was a strain was actually too much choice. People felt overwhelmed. In some cases, we had participants saying, actually, as much as providers, we want the right wheelchair, we want it to fit you, we want it to do all the things. And that is the gold standard. But if things were changing quickly, sometimes they needed something quick just to get them out of trouble until the longer term wheelchair was available. So that so that was a real problem. And sometimes too much choice, that's why we're there, to assess and give some options and make it less overwhelming sometimes. And chasing was a big thing. Everybody hated that. Admin, and in fact, in many cases, they knew something was wrong with the wheelchair. They knew they needed a review, but perhaps not surprisingly, until it was an absolute crisis, they wouldn't bother ringing up. I mean, it's not surprising, is it? Nobody goes to the doctor unless, they've had a problem, and then it's been a problem, and then it's been a problem, and then it's been a problem. So obviously, with people who are dealing with MS, they're tired, they're dealing with, other things in life, that's even more so. So what could we do to reduce that so they don't have to chase so much? Maybe we ask, do you need a review? And then it just makes that a little bit easier. Okay. So this is the honesty slide. In this study, this small qualitative study, it was an online only format. So because of that, obviously, it kind of excluded, unintentionally really, but it excluded anybody that wasn't comfortable with that, either because they weren't comfortable with the technology, or they're just sick of Zoom and they didn't want to be on Zoom or whatever. It did exclude people. It just happened to be that was only manual wheelchair users. That wasn't an official inclusion criterion, but that's how it went. And in fact, it wasn't strong enough to be an official theme, but many people expressed dread of a power chair. Just there was a cultural thing around that, and it was retrospective, and they were limited to 18 months, but in some cases it was right on 18 months. So it'd be nice to do a study which was a bit sooner, to when they'd gone through the provision process. Some of them were actively in the middle of it, but for some of them, well, not middle, they had finished, but just finished. There were practical constraints in that I wasn't able to get individuals with multiple sclerosis themselves to be part of the study design and analysis. That would have been the gold standard, particularly with qualitative research, because there's all this data, so I have the videos and the transcripts and coding them. Best practice is that you get another group of people with MS and you show them your themes and they say, yeah, that makes sense, or no, it doesn't. And so that if somebody was doing a similar study, that would be a better standard to have. As far as quality though, I did do some other things for quality. I had another researcher code one of the a fellow student, in fact, code another transcript. And you're not doing that to have exactly the same themes, right? Because we're interpreting this. So it's like if you had a pizza, I like a food analogy. If you had a pizza, one person might say it's a Friday night treat. Somebody else might say it's the most delicious food. Neither person is wrong. But it should be that when we're coding, and if somebody says it's a Friday night treat, I'm not shocked and surprised. And, I've at least thought about that as a possibility for interpretation. So we did that for quality. And there also was a checklist by Victoria Clark and Virginia Braun, who were really the ones that developed reflexive thematic analysis, to go through, does the study meet certain criteria? So we did have quality checks, but unfortunately, this time weren't able to do that. So what? Great. So I put some ideas for potential practice, obviously because it is a small study and it's about this group of people in the UK who were manual wheelchair users. One was getting close to needing a power chair, in fact, probably did already. It's up to you to decide how transferable it is or isn't. I'm happy to give a longer write-up to anybody that wants it. I will be applying for a publication, haven't quite yet, but after this conference, it's top of the to-do list. And anyways, so I've put it as potential, but it's like everything we do in our practice, isn't it? We try something, we see how it goes. So that's where we are. Ask the question, give it a go. So first one is about choice, because to me that was the most salient theme that really came out of it. There's nuance and there's specificity. Some people want all the choice. Some people just, they're like, yep. Still, obviously, we try to have people who we're working with have as much agency as possible, and that's extremely important. But it's not always the right thing to do to give every possible choice in the first instance. You know, there's always a possibility of review. So that was really important. So scaffolding is a word I use a lot in my life, usually to do with where I put my glasses and my keys so that they come with me places. And MS sensitive scaffolding. So that's to do with the supporting early engagement with a service, making it easy to come by, making it feel more approachable, working with your partners on neuro units or MS centers, so that that thinking process can start early on, before it's become a crisis and it's too late and somebody's already just not coping without any kind of mobility. Not surprisingly, modernize and sync websites. Some of them were very good. In one case, a client who said that the website was bad, I went to, and it was shocking for this particular NHS that won't be named nor shamed. So our online presence does really matter. And more than ever, I mean, everybody's really online now. You know, your grandmother's online, you know, everybody's online. So that's really important now. How old would Steve Jobs be now? Does anybody know who's a crazy Apple super fan? Caleb, you have an Apple. How old would Steve Jobs be? He was born in 1959. So that'd be 74? 64. I'd be young. That's fine. Yeah, you can see that's why I use data packages for my maths. 64. Okay, you'd be 64 if you were around. So yeah, and he invented Apple. So yeah, so you know, 80-year-olds usually can get on now. So providing information about what's going to happen, we're so used to it. You know, it's our daily grind. You assess, you offer some options, you do fitting, you do reviews. Of course, obviously, it's not so obvious if it's not your world. So if there's a way to find a nice infographic or whatever kind of way to give some information about what's going to happen, and maybe in more than one format. I know we do, you know, as responsible providers, we do tell people, but we tell people a lot of things, and it's a wall of information for people to get through. So how can we make that actual process clear? It's very helpful. And timing. So that whole thing, and that kind of comes into choice, really. Some people, they want something now that will do good enough. So things like hire schemes, etc., were found to be very, very helpful, particularly for the first chairs or in case of repair. That was really, really important to individuals. Also with the timing, and that kind of, again, comes into tailoring and choice, the ability to pause a pathway, obviously not forever. Everybody is, I mean, I don't know exactly how it works in America, but once you've started it, you want to get the equipment out. You want to do the thing, get it done. But a defined pause, like, okay, have a week, and you have to decide within a week, you know, and call back, you know, having that at least as an option. Would you like to? We had some people said that timing isn't only about being quicker. Sometimes it's about taking a breather so they can go away and think. So that was a really important one. And again, this one is really coming back to what I was saying about some of the cognitive and emotional energy of going through this sort of a process. Could you consider some kind of automatic reviews? Unfortunately, in the NHS, and I say this as an NHS therapist for 11 years before my current position, we don't like those a lot because people come in for reviews and then you find problems. But could we find problems when they're small and easy and fixable? You know, certainly the participants in the study seemed to think so, and they thought it would make their lives a lot better, and it would help them have a more trusting relationship, and probably would be better. But again, these are potential practice implications. So see what you think. Give it a go. Maybe do a little bit of an internal pilot and see how all of that goes. So I want to leave a little time at the end for questions. So I just want to say thank you. Not only for coming today, but for the work that everybody does, and for being part of this conference. Really exciting for me to be here. That's me, Faith Brown. maybe one day PhD, but not yet, just MSc at the moment. And that's my email. It's my personal email, so I can no longer hide. So if you have any questions, you can just write to me there if you want to discuss anything, or obviously you'll have the handout of these slides will be available through the app, etc., etc. And that has all the references in it, or you can take a picture of that, obviously, if you like. But just to go back, so this is really the point where I say, what kind of questions do we have, or comments actually from this group of very, very knowledgeable people in the room? And we'll have to have the microphone. Libby's got the microphone here because it is live streamed, and that way they can hear it on the live stream. Okay, so just there was an interim question because we have a big room here, getting the microphone around. Amy asked, have I thought about doing this with other disabilities or other groups? That would be great. You know, I had to do one project, and I just from the NHS have seen this to be a group that sometimes I didn't know that they were as well served as they could be, and they're very frequent, so that's why I started with them. And also they're grown-ups, so I had to recruit people and not have the complication of children in the time of the pandemic. But absolutely, you know, why not? And it wouldn't even have to be based on diagnosis. I think it would be great for future research to look at maybe people who are transitioning to power, you know, and partner with your clinics or NHS or whatever your local setup is. And, you know, you could get many more participants potentially, or, you know, look at a certain age, you know, what is it like to be a young person going through this? Because my youngest person was 28, and, you know, or be somebody who's a little bit older or whatever. So yeah, absolutely, it would be great for somebody to do that.
Yeah, so when you determined to use the vignette about Sam, was it a pretty benign vignette? Was it like a pretty routine experience that they were reading? Was there anything about it that would have been I don't know, untoward? I mean, every experience is different. Sometimes it goes very easily, sometimes it's a challenge. Where was that vignette and that type of
yeah, good question. I'll put it up on the screen. What could go wrong? Oh gosh. Literally, I don't know where this file is on this computer. Let's see if we could do it. Caleb, where is the file on your lovely computer? I don't want to pull up you know, your diary or something. But we'll bring up Sam. Basically, sorry, I have to lean over for the mic. Thanks, mate. He was somebody, I picked Sam based on kind of a lot of clients I'd worked with over the years. And it was at the evaluation stage for another piece of equipment. So he was already a manual wheelchair user, and he was buying a power chair mostly for outdoor use. So it was about that, I picked it at the assessment stage really for the power chair for somebody that's already been through a manual wheelchair phase. It was quite sunny as a vignette. Sam wasn't upset. But the only sort of controversial thing I threw in was that Sam wanted it to go right, so he hired a private therapist. Ooh, that's a little controversial. But I did that because he's paying money, and that shows value. So I wanted to see how they reacted to it. And as you saw, not everybody thought that was worth the money. So that's about as untoward as it got. Good question. Okay, next. Thanks. And I'll bring up Sam here while we're doing that. But then if you download it, you can read it, and the font's bigger, and you can actually see what you're looking at, which is always lovely to do. Is that? Oh, it's a topic guide, sorry. Get the short-sighted girl to find it. Oh, that actually, sorry, I apologize. On my slide, I've put the topic guide and not the vignette, but I can include that in the downloadable PDF. I'm happy to share that. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Faith, for the research and then transitioning it into sort of real-world practicality for us that are in the trenches. I'm just curious if you'd be willing to expand a little bit upon the explicit, you defined it as explicit expertise, the too much, the too little, in terms of maybe just a little bit more in terms of what the client shared with you and maybe your own practical experiences in terms of this particular clientele, the MS community.
Sure.
A little bit more just definition of what might be too much, what might be too little.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, thanks for that one. Yeah, so it's let me just put it up. So, oh good, we can see things. Yeah, so it was really about, and we'll bring all those themes up and then we can see them all together. I don't know, it's on my screen, it's not there, who knows? It's out for me. But let's just make sure we're playing. I literally don't know. I use presentations all the time. But point being, it was if, don't worry about it. Does this not look like I've hit play?
I know, it doesn't make sense.
Thank you, I feel better. Caleb has just said it doesn't make sense.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay, you know what I should do? Let's just do this. Okay, great. So it was, I've been in situations where, I mean, certainly probably a little bit that is my own perspective, and that's part of qualitative research. You bring yourself to the interview. And we all know nobody knows what occupational therapy is, really. They don't, isn't it terrible? Including occupational therapists sometimes. So they need to know practically what are you doing, you know? And so when, for example, one of my clients, well, not clients, participants, who was actually involved with a lot of advocacy, a local university near where she lived. She was like a patient advisory group. She was very clued up. When she was talking about her experience with the NHS, which she liked, she thought they were good, even though she wasn't so happy about the OT with Sam. She had a lot of good things to say about this young lady that came and measured her and really knew everything. And I said, oh, so what was that lady's role? It was obviously the occupational therapist. She didn't know, but she did like that person had expertise. And other people, so that was that bit. And then other people just found, they said that when they would talk about the whole team and like, okay, we had somebody, so in your terms, an ATP and a clinician, and they were working together, and this one knew about the product in a lot of depth, and they both had things to say, and we all worked together. That was a really good experience for them. Whereas if somebody didn't really say what their role was and what it meant in everyday terms, that caused a little bit of anxiety and confusion. Does that answer your question?
Could you extrapolate a little bit more, perhaps, on the presentation of interventions?
Okay, and what do you mean by that? So the question was, can I extrapolate more on the presentation of interventions?
Like the breadth of interventions, like did some people feel too many options were provided? Is that part of the too much, the too little?
Oh, yeah, so like, yes, so that was more about, yeah, the choice. The question was, did some people feel too many options were provided? And that was yes. Like that was yes, because in the NHS they had a mix. Some of them were private, some of them were NHS, and some of them described like that gentleman that was talking about. It's like buying a car when you're 17. He was like, and he was talking about, I don't know where to start. You know, what do I even need? And in fact, his first wheelchair was because he watched a video of somebody with a folding wheelchair that she liked. And he was like, oh, I ought to get a folding. He didn't really need a folding. He used it like a rigid chair and hardly ever folded it, you know, but then like, he's like, he just kind of wanted to reduce the options. So he was like, right, folding chair, and kind of went down that road. And he got quite a nice, you know, the top level folding chair was still a folding chair. Yeah, good question. Okay, other ones? Yeah, right behind in the next row here, we have the lady with a nice teal top.
So I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I do MS wheelchairs a lot. And these themes resonate for me and for the clients that I see. Folks tend to be very easily overwhelmed. The first chair is a really, 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 really big deal. Lots of crying and lots of I'm giving up and this sort of feelings. And so what I would wonder is the next step could be taking these themes and talking to other seating clinics and whatnot, and sort of see if those themes hold true with a larger audience, with other clients, because they really do for me, and I don't know if they do for others of you in the room that that do MS, but that kind of easily overwhelmed. I don't want too much, but I want just enough. I want to sort of know your qualifications and know that you're doing the right thing. They sort of make sense.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes. And yes, absolutely. Got my email. Let's talk. Yeah, that's what I'd love to do is then maybe let's go quantitative. So, this was our deep, small group. Let's find out about this one group. But if you could get a lot of people, and then now we can ask questions based on those themes. We know, some questions to ask. And then let's get a big sample and we can do statistics and what does that really mean? And, what does it mean in this group, that's young or old or whatever. Fantastic. So yeah, this is why I need to get it published. It's when I get back, it's on the to-do list.
Hi, thank you, Faith. Loved your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I was wondering, with the potential for some executive functioning issues with some individuals with MS, how did you kind of take that into consideration during your assessment, but also how does that kind of play into how you explain things, or do you address it with them as like that could be a barrier as to why they might be more overwhelmed or less?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really, really great question. Yeah, definitely. So in the context of this research, I didn't really do a full assessment, but I know what you're saying, like how did that build come into it? And it could be some great studies in their own right. And I'm sure there have been some, but I haven't really gone into the literature on that executive function and MS and wheelchairs. So probably some exciting research there. In the context of this project, I just went kind of OT style, a bit functional. So if somebody had cognitive skills enough to follow the recruitment instructions, that was a good sign. And not everybody did. That was actually an exclusion criteria. I didn't do a cognitive assessment, but I did have a couple of people that were willing, but they forgot they signed up. And so we didn't do it. And there were, because MS is like that, it varies day to day, and we did have, one of our participants was very honest. She said, I'm having a bit of a day of brain fog. And that's one thing that was nice about qualitative research is you have an interview topic guide, but it's a bit like a podcast. It's not like slavish, I must ask these exact words. Whereas quantitative, you do, or you introduce bias. So I was able to be a bit flexible. And if somebody didn't understand something, I could ask it in a different way. And then also because of the way the thing is coded, this particular approach is not just they say what they mean what they say. Like, for example, if somebody came up to me and said, Faith, how are you doing? And I said, I'm fine. They think, Faith's fine. And if somebody said, Faith, how are you doing? I'm like, oh man, I'm living the dream. You wouldn't code that as dream. You would code that as sarcasm or fatigue. So this particular way of coding allowed that kind of, it's called a latent meaning, what's behind, and obviously it's my guess. I'm a researcher. That's why, the transcripts are there. Yeah, so there's that meaning. So that did help. Really great question. Thank you. Where are we on? Oh, we're still good. 5 minutes. Okay, so there is time if there's another question or comment. Okay, I think it's silence. Right, oh, great. We've got one more here right in the back. Where that other microphone's made it. This is kind of nice having a floating microphone. I feel free.
Hi. Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello.
I was curious what your thoughts were on, you mentioned the kind of tailoring the choices so that when they're at the appointment, they're not overwhelmed, minimizing the emotional energy, which often we talk about kind of energy conservation more as it relates to physical energy. So I appreciate that you mentioned that. And then you kind of mentioned sharing information early, but when they want to hear it and having it available to them. So how do you recommend kind of providing that information of what's out there and available so that when they're ready to start thinking about what they want that to look like, and when you start heading towards that need for the appointment to talk about the wheelchair prescription, they have already had an idea of what's out there so that we can then tailor to that need rather than having that whole conversation of what that need is during the wheelchair evaluation and then pulling a bunch of chairs to kind of reflect that need. We can maybe have that conversation ahead of time without overwhelming or creating this emotional energy depletion. So I was just curious what your thoughts were on how to kind of stage that throughout the process, so that when we get to the evaluation process and we're ready to have that conversation, we're not creating problems.
Yes, you're not starting at zero, really. Yeah.
So anything you have to say about that?
So yeah, again, this would be really a super exciting research as well. People could try some methods and see what happens. But this is an exciting time with technology and the fact that everybody's used to it, sort of. It doesn't always work. But things like QR codes. Most people have smartphones, and really working with partners, in collaboration. I mean, we talk about collaboration a lot, but then everybody wants to be the one deciding what the collaborated thing is. Somebody has to not let their idea be the idea that goes forward. But yeah, so working with whatever partners that see the people with MS before they need wheelchairs, I think is a useful way. Patient groups, disability advocacy groups, short videos. People like a short video, and we will tell Google things we will tell nobody else. So something that if in the dark of night they can Google and get something useful can be a very good way to get there. And just little reminders, whatever kind of way, brochures, which are old school, but sometimes people like to flip through a brochure. So when they go, or posters or whatever, when they go to get care for other MS needs, it's just right there. So I think a lot of that kind of thing would be ways to try, and it could be an interesting study to try different ways and see how it goes. Yeah, thank you.